This is page number 31 in the guided notebook. And on this page, we have steps to divide decimals. So we're going to use these steps to go through these three division of decimal problems. But first, we're going to look at an example of exactly what I'm looking for. So right here, we have 364 and 2/10 divided by 12. So the first thing you want to do is write your division in a standalone division. So that's step number 1. Make sure your divisor is a whole number. If not, multiply by the power of 10. So if we look here, our divisor is 12. And 12 is already a whole number. So there is no need to move the decimal point here. You just move your decimal point from the dividend to the quotient, and then you will divide like normal. So if your divisor is already a whole number, and remember a whole number is a whole, it does not have any fractional parts, a fraction or decimal parts. So since 12 is already a whole number, we will just divide as normal. So once we divide, we'll get 30 and 35 hundredths. And remember, wherever your decimal point is in the dividend, you move it right above it in the quotient. And that's after you've made sure your divisor is a whole number. And then to check your work, you would just multiply your divisor times your quotient, and you should get your product. So over here, they multiply and I want you to write this down. This is the quotient. The 12 is the divisor. So if we multiply these two together, we should get the product, and it should be equivalent to the dividend. So since we had to move 2 decimal spaces to make our multiplication a whole number, our first factor, we had to move it in twice here. So we're going to practice decimals, multiplying and dividing decimals, because in order to check your work, you have to know how to multiply with decimals. So let's look at answer choice C right here. So step number 1, you have to write the division in a standalone division format. So 144 thousandths divided by 96 hundredths. So that's step number 1. Write it in a standalone division. I'm going to move on to step number 2. Make sure your divisor, so this is our divisor right here. Make sure your divisor is a whole number. If not, multiply by the power of 10. So to make your divisor a whole number, and then we want to multiply the dividend by the same power of 10. So in order to make 96 hundredths a whole number, I need to move the decimal point 2 times to the right, which is like multiplying by 100. So since I multiply my divisor by 100, I need to multiply my dividend by the same number, which is 100. 2 times. Moving my decimal 2 times to the right is multiplying by 100. So my new standard long division will look like this. 14 and, because this is my new decimal point, 14 and 4/10 divided by 96. Notice my divisor is a whole number, 96. And now I can move on to the next step. So I want to place my decimal point. I'm on step 3. Place my decimal point from the dividend right above it in the quotient. So right above it there. Once your divisor is a whole number, you can do that. And then we want to estimate using compatible numbers. So I know I can't take a whole group of 96 from 14. So I know it should be lower than 1. So we want to apply the 4-step method. So we want to divide, multiply, subtract, and bring down. So 96 goes into 14 0 times. So 96 times 14 is 0. 96 times 14 is 0, and then we subtract 0 from 14 to get 14. I'm going to bring down my next number, which is a 4. So I'm going to bring down my 4. And now I have to figure out how many times does 96 go into 144. So to figure that out, we have to use compatible numbers. So how many times does 96 go into 144? I'm going to say 1 time because 96 is close to 100, and 144 is not higher than 200. So I'm going to say 1. So 1 times 96 is 96. I'm going to subtract. And then I'm going to regroup. All right. So now I have to add a 0 in the dividend, bring it down, and keep dividing. So I have to ask myself, how many times does 96 go into 480? And since it ends with a 0 and 96 is close to 100, 480 is close to 500, I'm going to try 96 times 5. And 96 times 5 just happened to be 480. So I'm going to put a 5 here, and I'm going to subtract, and my decimal point will terminate. Now, in order to check your work, you don't have to put the check on your paper because I know you don't have space in this book, but if you could squeeze it somewhere, you can. So to check your work, take your divisor, multiply it by your quotient, or it doesn't matter which order you put this in. And then you will multiply like normal. So here is, we're on the same page, we're going to use the steps. Letter A, B, and so we're going to check, we're going to do these here. So we have 2 and 2500ths divided by 5/10. So our divisor is not a whole number. So this is the first one, the one with the 4 next to it. Our divisor is not a whole number, so we move the decimal point to the right one time. That's multiplying by 10, 1, 0. So since we multiplied the divisor by 10, we have to multiply the dividend by the same power of 10. So now our decimal point is between the 2 and the 5. I'm going to rewrite this as 22 and 5/10 divided by 5. Now my divisor is a whole number. Whole. You have to make sure your divisor is a whole number. Now I'm ready to move on to step 3. So I'm going to move my decimal point from the dividend right above it to the quotient, and I'm going to divide like normal. 5 goes into 22 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. I subtract, I have 2. Then I'm going to bring down my next number, which is a 5. 5 goes into 25 5 times. Whatever number you bring down, you have to put that number right, that goes into that number of times right above that number in the quotient. I know that was a lot of that's, but you get the picture. If you do not put the numbers in the right location, you're going to open up the opportunity for error, and your decimal point could potentially be in the wrong spot. So let's go ahead and check our work. I do want you to put your checks down here below it, out of the box. So to check your work, you're going to take your quotient, which is 4 and 5/10, times your divisor, which is 5. And we have 5 times 5, which is 25. And then we have 5 times 4, which is 20, plus 2 is 22. Now we know that 4 and 5/10 times 5 is not 225. So what we have to do is go ahead and put our decimal point in. So we have to count the number of decimal places after the fact in the factors. So we have 1 decimal placement here. And then we have 5 is already a whole number, so we can put a 0 there. And once we add that up, we have to move our decimal point back into the quotient, back into the product 1 time. So our 225 decimal point is here. We move it back in 1 time. Our answer is 22 and 5/10, which match the 22 and 5/10 that we had in the original expression that we divided with. Now we're going to move on to the one that says 3 and the letter choice A. So we have to write it in standard long division first. So we will write 2 and 4/10 divided by 3/10. So the first thing we have to do is what? Make our divisor a whole number. So we have to move our decimal point to the right 1 time. That's multiplying by 10. Whatever we do to the divisor, we have to do the same thing to the dividend, multiply by 10. So now we have 24, because our decimal point is now here. 24 divided by 3. And we should all know that 24 divided by 3 is 8. And we end. And you can check your work, put your check, by multiplying your divisor 3 times your divisor 3 times your quotient 8. 3 times 8 is 24. 8 groups of 3 is 24, or 3 groups of 8 is 24. Now we're going to move on to the last one. And here we have 38 and 2700ths divided by 4 and 3/10. So what do we have to do here? We have to first write it in standard long division, which we did. We have to make sure our divisor is a whole number. For which one is our divisor? which number is our divisor? So our divisor is 4 3/10. So we have to make that a whole number by moving the decimal point one time to the right, which is multiplying by 10. Since we multiplied our divisor by 10, we have to multiply our dividend by 10 as well. So our new decimal point placement is going to be between the 2 and the 7 and not between the 8 and the 2. So our new expression is going to be 382 and 7/10 divided by 43. And now that our divisor is a whole number, we can go ahead and divide like normal. And then we can check our work to make sure we are correct. So we can think 43 is close to 50 and 382 is close to 400. So about how many times does 50 go into 400? Well, for each 100 you have 2. So I'm going to try at 8 first. Because how many 50 cents are in $4? I'm going to try 8 first. 8 times 43, I'm going to do that right here. 43 times 8, 8 groups of 43. We have 24, and then we have 32, 34. So we have 8 times 43 is 344. We subtract, and we get 38. So I'm going to bring down my next number. So you have to regroup. I'm going to bring down my next number, which is a 7. You make sure your decimal point is right above the number in the quotient, above the decimal in the quotient. If you don't put the decimal point, you're going to get a different answer because there's a difference between 8 and 9/10 and 89. All right, so I'm going to bring down my next number, which is a 7. And I have to figure out how many times does 43 go into 387. So since 43 times 8 is 344, I need to go up. So I'm going to see what 43 times 9 is. I'm going to do it over here. 9 times 4 is 36, plus 2 is 38. So I know that since I brought down the 7, I need to put how many times 43 goes into 387 right above that 7 that I brought down, which is 9 times. And 9 times 43 is 387. So I can go ahead and subtract those 9 groups of 43. And that's going to give me a 0. So I can say that 4 3/10 goes into 38 and 27/100, 8 and 9/10 times. Because all we did was we made an equivalent fraction. So I'm going to go ahead and check my work. So to check, I'm going to write my quotient, which is the answer to a division problem, times my divisor, which is 43. And then I'm going to multiply. 9 times 3 is 27. And then 3 times 8 is 24, plus 2, 25, 26. And then I'm going to put a 0 as a placeholder because I'm moving on to a place value that's one higher than the one before. So I have to put a 0. So I have to multiply 4 times 9, which is 36. And then I have to multiply 4 times 8, which is 32, plus 3 is 35. Then I'm going to add to get this number right here, 3,827. Now, that number is unreasonable, and that is because I need to put my decimal point in the product. So I have to count the number of decimal spaces behind my factor. So my first factor, to make this a whole number, I need to move the decimal point one time. And 43 is already a whole number, so I'll add 0 to that. And I need to move my decimal point one time back into the product. So my answer is going to be 382 and 7/10. So I know my answer is correct because I ended up with the same number that I started with.